The year is 1904. Again. The Summer Olympics are held in St. Louis in the US, and in the men's marathon, the runner Thomas Hicks had been ingesting rat poison, brandy, 4 raw eggs, and is hallucinating severely. This in and of itself is of course an interesting set of circumstances, but it is made all the more interesting by the fact that he's also about to win the marathon with the slowest winning time ever recorded in Olympic history. At this point you probably have a lot of questions, and those are likely to be great questions. Let me explain. The 1904 Olympics. Russia and Japan were at war at that time, and because of that, most nations didn't bother showing up at all. 600 out of 650 athletes were from North America, which led to the medal count to look like this. Third, Cuba. 4 gold, 2 silver, 3 bronze. Second, Germany. 4 gold, 4 silver, and 5 bronze. First, United States. 78 gold, 78 silver, 78 bronze. Fuck yeah. Race organization. The Olympic Marathon, a 100-meter sprint with extra steps. So the marathon was about 25 miles or 40 kilometers long, and the course they ran it on was an absolute disaster. The race was starting with a couple of laps in the France Olympic Field Stadium, but after that, most of it was run on country roads that were littered with stones and covered ankle-deep in dust. The map that I used is a modern one where most of what they ran through is now suburbs, but back then, it looked more like this. To say that the roads were ill-suited for running is an understatement. However, they were especially not suited for the cars the race organizers, coaches and assistants were riding in. They were breaking down a lot. More importantly though, they were riding in front of the runners and would cover them and their lungs in sand and dust. On top of that, they also chose a route that included 7 hills with elevations of up to 300 feet. 107 meters. However, at least they were doing the marathon early in the morning, so that it wasn't too hot and there wasn't much traffic. Except they didn't, and they chose to start the marathon on a super humid day at 3 in the afternoon at 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Damn you, son! And the runners had to dodge crowds of people, tractors, trolleys, cars and trains. However, at least they could avoid any major heat-related danger because they had enough water for all of the runners to stay hydrated. Except they didn't. Let me introduce you to James E. Sullivan, researcher and chief organizer of the Olympics. He decided to only have one water source for the entire 25-mile race, because he thought the Olympic marathon was as good a place as any to test his theory on purposeful dehydration, which is the theory that dehydration could actually improve athletic performance. There's not much in terms of footage that exists from 1904 because film cameras just weren't around back then, but miraculously there is actually footage of him coming up with that idea. Here it is.
But wait! There's more!
The water source they had at the marathon was dirty, and people got sick from drinking it. So a marathon run on busy, dusty country roads littered with stones up and down 7 hills on a humid, hot summer day without access to clean drinking water or basic understanding of how the human body works. What could possibly go wrong? Most of the runners were from the States. There was a Canadian guy, a British fella, and for South Africa, there were the first black athletes ever to take part in an Olympic event, Jan Marshani and Len Tonyane. There was also a Greek team, where none of them ever ran a marathon, and then there was this guy, Felix Henri Carvajal. We'll just call him Felix. One thing you may notice from this photograph is that everybody's dressed in the 1904 equivalent of Nike running shoes and Under Armour shirts, whereas he's rocking apple-bottom jeans and boots with fur. The reason for this is that he is a mailman that only just came over from Cuba to run this marathon. You see, when he originally arrived with a ship in the US in New Orleans, he thought it would be a good idea to make a bit of an extra buck, with the only tried and tested method there is: gambling. And so he lost all of his money, and he had to hitch rides, jump on trains, and literally run to St. Louis for the marathon. He only arrived about an hour before the whole thing started. The things he wore and ran with were literally all of his possessions. Another runner that had problems before the race even started was the French Albert Corret. While signing up for the marathon, he didn't have his papers all correct, and so the race official said, "Tell you what, best I can do, you run for us. The US. Oui? Perfect." And out of the French Albert Corret became the American Al Corey. There was also a Russian team that actually wanted to compete in the marathon, but they showed up a couple of days late because Russia was still on a different calendar and they literally got the dates wrong. Because of the same thing, the October Revolution actually started in November. Hearing of the treacherous conditions of the course and the whole you have to run a marathon without water thing, 8 runners said hell nah and dropped out before the race even started. And so at 3:03 p.m. for the remaining 32 runners, the marathon begins. Side note, I've read through a lot of different sources and looked at all the photos I could find to stitch together where everyone was at which point and when all the things happened to whom. And I compiled all of those information in After Effects on a map in order to illustrate them instead of reading them out. However, for some things I just had to guess and fill in a couple of gaps because one source tells you one thing, another source says something different, some of them avoid giving details like it's lava, so bear with me. The marathon. Coming out of the stadium, Lord Smeller and Spring are in the lead, followed by Lentaniani and Felix. Lentau was actually tipped to be one of the favorites for the race, but he was hampered by the fact that he was the only runner that didn't have shoes. After the stadium section, he would be slowed down significantly by this, having to tiptoe around parts of the course and leaving his feet badly bruised at the end of the race. Felix, on the other hand, slowed down because, being the charming, extroverted Cuban he was, he decided to stop and talk to some of the adoring spectators. And then he turned himself into a picker. Funniest shit I've ever seen. No, Felix! So after 2 miles, Meller is in the lead, in front of Lord Spring, Carr and Lentaniani, who is 5th but dropping back steadily. Meller extends his lead over the next couple of miles, and at this point definitely looks like the favorite to win this race. That's around the time this photo was taken. And that's how that street looks today. We truly live in a society. Felix, meanwhile, decided to stop talking to random people in the crowd and rejoined the race in 14th. Mile 6. Meller bit off a bit more that he could chew right from the start, and Spring and Carr have caught up with him, while dropping Lords in 4th. That's where this photo was taken, and you can kinda see them dropping Lords there behind them in the distance. Oh, and Doggo. It was a short-lived sniff of glory for the two chasing, as both Spring and then Edward Carr would drop out because of all of the dust they inhaled running behind the race officials' cars. On mile 7, with Meller still recovering, Fred Lords takes the lead. Fred Lords himself was a bricklayer from New York who worked all day and trained every night to prepare himself for the marathon. Train by night, bricklayer by day, all night. He was a fan favorite, and so the crowd went mad when he took the lead. When he got the lead, he dropped the field faster than 2020 dropped Fall Guys. So Lord's in the lead, Newton takes 2nd, Meller now 3rd, Lorden in 4th, and in 5th place, Al Corey. Mile 8. Lord's legs forgot how to legs and started to cramp up, forcing him to retire from the lead of the race. While standing at the side of the street watching all the runners go by, he remembered that watching a whole marathon live is more exhausting than to run one, and hitched a ride to the finish line. So Newton takes the lead with Meller in 2nd. 3rd placeman John Lorden was an Irishman from Cork who ran under the American flag because he wanted to stick it to the British. Ireland was part of the UK back then. Which is just about as Irish as a leprechaun looking nervously at a potato plant. He won the Boston Marathon the year before, but after 10 miles, even he dropped out, vomiting from all the dust. So Al Corey takes 3rd from him, William Garcia in 4th, and Thomas Hicks takes 5th. Around the halfway mark, the runners had a sip of that sweet, sweet, dirty water, except for Garcia and Hicks, who just didn't drink anything and caught up to the leaders because of that. A great decision with immense benefit for all involved. The second half of the race. Shortly after Meller continues to run again, he suffers cramps and decides to walk. And after drinking bucketfuls of dirty water from the well, Corey and Newton slowed down for the rest of the race, having to time and time again involuntarily take the Browns to the Super Bowl. So Garcia takes the lead and swiftly disappears from the face of the earth. It later turned out that Garcia ate too much dust and almost bit the dust. He had ingested so much of that stuff that it sanded its way through his stomach. Jesus. He probably would have died if it wasn't for some random passerby to notice him lying in the ditch somewhere. And so Thomas Hicks took the lead. And let me tell you about the man, the meme, the legend, Thomas Hicks. All of a sudden, he led the race by 1.5 miles. However, in the sweltering hot conditions, he was sweating more than a blind lesbian pacing up and down Fish Market, and he was so dehydrated that he wanted to lie down. His trainers, however, decided that it was best for him to just carry on, and physically restrained him from lying down. They even had water with them, but they also believed in purposeful dehydration. They also showered his body with warm water several times. Nothing better than being showered with really warm water when you're exercising at 90 degrees. And you think this is bad, but for Hicks it was only downhill from here. And unfortunately I'm not talking about elevation, because unfortunately his trainers had a good idea for every wrinkle of their brain, and in order to lift him up they gave him strychnine, better known as rat poison, which they thought to have stimulating qualities. Which it does, in small doses in a controlled setting. It is however not advisable for children, pregnant women, rats, or when you're dehydrated and in the middle of running a marathon. Think of it as cocaine's glue-sniffing cousin that dropped out of high school, and you understand why giving Hicks brandy on top of that was an even worse idea. Meanwhile, Felix made it to second place and was catching the struggling Hicks fast. However, because he lost all of his money he hadn't eaten in 40 hours, and when he saw an apple tree, he stopped to munch on a couple of Granny Smiths. Much like Chihuahuas, those apples turned out to be rotten from the inside. And Felix got sick and decided to take a little nap while being in second place of an Olympic marathon. And so Barefoot Man Lantoniani took second. Oh, and remember Fred Lords, the bricklayer guy who dropped out early and hitched a ride? His car broke down on the way to the finish line. Not even cars could finish this marathon. However, while standing at the side of the street, Lords remembered that watching a whole marathon live is more exhausting than to run one and decided to re-enter the race in third place. Lantau looked promising in second place, but then guess what? No, don't guess. He got chased off the course for a couple of miles by a pack of feral dogs. Lords, being all recovered now, jogged past Hicks like he was on a Sunday stroll. Hicks lost all of his motivation, and 22 miles in he stopped at the side of the road. They also just ran out of brandy, but Hicks was in luck. A spectator offered to help him out with another bottle. I would just like to imagine the coach said, "Well, sorry Tom, we ran out of brandy." And inside he's like, "Oh, thank the Lord." And somebody from the crowd is like, "Oh, you need brandy? I've got a spare bottle." And he's like dying inside. They topped the second bottle off with another dose of rat poison and a couple of raw eggs.
Can I offer you a nice egg in this trying time?
I mean, why not at this point? And so he carried on running while starting to hallucinate.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Cajita's wares, if you have coin.
Meanwhile, Lords runs to the finish line in the stadium. The crowd goes mad, everybody cheers, takes a photo with the daughter of the president, is about to accept the gold trophy, and then somebody in the crowd goes, "You were cheating!" Everybody goes quiet. And he goes, "Yeah, I was cheating." His defense was basically, "It was just a prank, bro." Turns out, they didn't like pranks all too much, and he was banned from the Olympics for life. He appealed the ban a couple of months later by pleading that he was insane. And then he won the Boston Marathon. Not being aware of any of that, Hicks was still leading the pack. Barely able to run, hallucinating severely, with the whole field of runners catching up to him. At this point, it was neither certain that he would win this marathon, nor was it certain that he would still be alive to see the end of it. And so his trainers made the only sensible decision and decided to drive him to the hospital instead. Except they didn't, and for the last stretch, they just sort of carried him over the finish line while he was shuffling his feet pretending to run. The finish. And so after 3 hours and 30 minutes, Thomas Hicks won the 1904 Olympic Marathon. Al Corey finished second, Arthur Newton finished third, and the Cuban mailman, apple-bottom jeans, Felix Carvajal, the absolute mad lad, managed to come in fourth after taking a flippin' nap. Valulis, who had never even attempted a marathon, came fifth, and after his escapades with the dogs and without shoes, Lantoniani came ninth. It was by far the slowest marathon winning time in Olympic history, by half an hour. You know what's funny? On the official Olympics.com site, they say it was a controversial victory because Hicks had been helped by his trainers at various points along the route. He'd been helped? I mean, except for that last bit. If I didn't know any better, I would think they were actively torturing him. He was SpongeBob out of the water level dehydrated. He wasn't allowed to drink water, only moisturize his mouth and then spit it out. I mean, props for resisting the temptation of billion years of evolution that tell him to just drink the water, please. And then to make things worse, it's really hot and somebody showers his body with warm water. At least he's thinking, well, it will cool off and then it's going to be really refreshing. But then he's showered with warm water again anytime before that happens. All of that on a diet of raw eggs and brandy. And then to top it all off, being fed rat poison that makes him hallucinate. So I don't know if it's fair to say they helped him. There's this term in endurance sports of hitting the wall when you are all out of electrolytes. Thomas Hicks didn't hit the wall. He took the wall out for dinner and then it ate him. He lost 8 pounds and almost died if it wasn't for doctors treating him immediately after crossing the finish line. He retired after the marathon and never ran again. And then the Russian team arrived. Hello. Thank you for watching. This was a lot of work. So a very special thanks to my first patrons, O2 Inhaler, Tim Vandenberg and Tyler Hobbs, you absolute mad lads. If you want your name to be fourth in the credits of all of this channel's videos forever, then you need to hurry up and subscribe to my Patreon before somebody else does it. Quick! If you don't feel like subscribing just yet, just give this video a like. Anyways, see you next time. Have a lovely day. After James E. Sullivan, the guy responsible for this mess, died, they did an autopsy on him and actually found elephants, ropes, acrobats, and a tent inside of him and determined that he was not a clown, but indeed an entire circus.